As the internet evolves, so do domestic and international extremist organizations. That's according to the FBI. The Bureau says those negative forces have an extensive presence online, which helps radicalize and recruit people who happen to be receptive to extremist messages. You need only look as far as the January 6th attack, deadly attack, better yet, in Washington for an example of how the existence of social networks helped violent actors organize and nearly bring down our government that day. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee is meeting today to talk about how social media platforms can amplify domestic extremism. We're here to talk about just that and who is vulnerable. We bring in psychiatrist Carole Lieberman. She joins us from Los Angeles. I know it's early there, so good morning and welcome back to BNC Live. Always a pleasure. So how does this happen, Dr. Lieberman? How is it? Is it just lone actors finding a community, reaching out, and then breeding hate?
Well, yes. A lot of the people who are vulnerable to what they see and read on the internet, are lonely. Some have psychological problems and so on. But, what's going on now is really a very slippery slope in terms of what the government is, deciding on and talking with big tech. It's one thing. I mean, there's really the danger of censorship on the one hand versus not wanting to promote violence on the other hand. So, really it's a story of how the horse got out of the barn, and they're trying to close the barn gate after the horse got out. Because when these tech giants came about, private companies, there weren't enough restrictions put in on them, and now they have tremendous power, whether it's about inciting violence or even just things like portraying drugs and sex that kids can get to, even though they supposedly have these age limits and so on. So it's really a very delicate balance here, and needless to say, the tech giants don't want to give up their power.
All right, well, talking about that power, how do algorithms play into that power?
Yes, the slippery slope of algorithms. They are supposed to be looking for things, posts that have certain words or certain concepts, and that is supposed to be the attention is supposed to be drawn to people who are watching them. But there are so many people posting on these different platforms, it gets to be really difficult to monitor everybody. But there's a second slippery slope to this whole thing that's going on. I mean, I don't know that people realize just how serious this is. Our liberties are really at stake here. One, with what I was saying with social media and controlling it and trying to control it. On the other hand, the other slippery slope is who they're calling a domestic terrorist. It was originally that people like Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, with the Oklahoma bombing, they were domestic terrorists. Now the words domestic terrorists or domestic extremists are being used for anybody who, the person who's talking about it, if they don't agree with the politics of the person who they're talking about, they're calling them a domestic terrorist. And the most recent horrible example of that is parents who are being called domestic terrorists if they disagree, if they dare to complain at a school board meeting.
Now, Dr. Lieberman, you're talking about other Americans calling other parents, or other parents, better yet, calling parents domestic terrorists. You're not talking about the FBI deeming these parents domestic terrorists.
Yes, I am. The National School Board Association, this is recent, the National School Board Association wrote a letter to President Biden complaining about parents who complain at school board meetings. And Biden sent a letter to the FBI, who sent a letter to other enforcement agencies. And
this is also part of Attorney General Garland testifying on Capitol Hill.
Yes, exactly. And so this is really, people need to watch what's happening here. It's not just about drugs and sex on TikTok. It's really our fundamental freedoms that are being discussed.
I mean, it's also fair to say, Dr. Lieberman, and I'm not grouping all these parents together, but some of these parents were threatening some pretty heinous things towards school officials. Wouldn't that be considered a domestic terrorist based on the language?
Well, I don't think just, parents are frustrated, and that doesn't give them any right to, be rude necessarily, but we do have the First Amendment. I mean, I think it's gotten to the point where parents are feeling like nobody is listening to them. They have no say at what kids are being taught. And so, yes, I think it's fair to complain. Parents have always complained at PTA meetings and school board meetings and so on.
And
but,
it's also worth noting, Dr. Lieberman, the insurrectionists are also parents.
Well, I guess some of them might have been. I presume. But I'm just saying it gets dangerous when you just kind of throw, because I work as I've talked about this on Black News Channel about being the terrorist therapist. I've been working on this for the past 20 years. So, helping people cope with terrorism and so on. So I'm very familiar and very sensitive to all of these issues. And I think we have to be careful who we expand the definition of terrorist or domestic terrorist to. It can't just be people we disagree with.
No, you're absolutely correct. But I want to ask you this last question, and then we have to wrap. Do you think Americans have a hard time facing the word terrorist when the person resembles them?
Yes, yes, but because we think of terrorists, 9/11, we think of radical Islamists as terrorists, but I'm not saying that there couldn't be such a thing as a domestic terrorist, as Timothy McVeigh, for example, was a good example of that. But it's a much bigger, more violent kind of thing than what we're talking about now with parents who are just kind of frustrated.
Yeah, and the FBI has actually deemed them one of the most violent, fastest growing groups in America. Dr. Lieberman, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.